I'm Jim Collison, and live from our virtual studios around the world. This is Gallup's Call to Coach, recorded on April 24th, 2020. Call to Coach is a resource for those who want to help others discover and use their strengths. We have Gallup experts and independent strengths coaches share tactics, insights, and strategies to help coaches maximize the talent of individuals, teams, and organizations around the world. If you're listening live, love to have you join us in our chat room. There's a link right above me there on the live page. It'll take you to a YouTube instance. There is a chat room there either to the right or down below the video window. Sign in. There's 3 little dots in that chat room. Pop it out so you can put it anywhere on your screen. Love to have your questions during the program. If you are listening to the recorded version of the podcast, you can send us your questions. You can still send us your questions. coaching@gallup.com. Don't forget, if you're on YouTube, to subscribe. And if you haven't started listening to this as a podcast, great way to do it as you're out walking the dog or exercising. I used to say in a car, in a train, in a plane. Right now, we're not doing a lot of those things. And so you can subscribe and get those available as a podcast. Dr. Mike McDonald is our host today. He works as a senior workplace consultant here at Gallup. And Mike, always great to have you on Call to Coach. Welcome back.
Yeah, it's awesome, Jim. Yeah, I think not everybody caught this comment, but I'm just gonna be really transparent. Nate says Mike's excited to get started. When I jumped on with Jim and Father Jeff, my lead-in point was I am coming out of my skin. I have been quite excited and animated to have this time in this conversation with Father Jeff. And Jim pointed out that we've been tracking this moment in time for a while now. So it's great to see it really come to fruition. And I do have activator number 6. So, what do you do based on the reaction to anything other than just light the fuse? So it is my privilege and pleasure. I get to introduce my friend, somebody who I admire greatly. His servant leadership, his passion, his transparency, and his involvement is something that we should all pay attention to. He's going to be uncomfortable with that praise and those compliments, but I say in all sincerity, that's out of expectation that he has for doing great work, not out of his ego or any other stylistic preference in that regard. But we have Father Jeff Lorig with us. Jeff is the Director of Pastoral Services here in the Omaha Archdiocese. And he has been, I would say, one of the best practice architects at assembling not just a story, but a structure around strengths with intentionality and outcomes, engagement with intentionality, and the combination of both of those two in a way that I think bears examination, that deserves some of our attention and our study and exploration. So I'm really excited to get into that conversation. You are going to hear and experience Father Jeff's top 5 strengths in 3D as we come through this conversation. So just as we get a little bit of insight in what we're listening into and where he thinks and how he succeeds, Father Jeff leads with strategic learner, input, futuristic, and connectedness. I'll repeat those back again: strategic, learner, input, futuristic, and connectedness. And he markets them spectacularly with his mug right there. So, Father Jeff, great to have you here, and can't wait to get into the conversation. If I was just to kind of help us get to know, I think it's important we start with you. Specifically, and we have a favorite question we love to ask folks, just to get inside how they see their role and how they see themselves operate inside of it. If I were to ask you what you get paid to do, what would your response be in reaction to that question as we get to know you better?
I get paid to think and dream and learn and implement things. That would be a quick way to put it. But I would say, if you had to kind of wrap it all up in a couple of sentences, if I believe in some future strategic value, and I can learn it pretty quickly, and I can become the local expert on a subject, and then I usually can implement it and invite others to help me to do that. So that's pretty much, learner input, strategic. I got belief there somewhere in the dominant, and activator and arranger, ideation. Basically, I came to that realization not because I self-discovered it, but I took the assessment a while ago, and probably 5 years ago, maybe a little bit longer than that. And there's kind of a story attached to it, but I don't know whether to tell you the story or whether to just get into the whole thing. But
tell the story. I think you'll accomplish both through the story. Yeah,
okay.
Tell us.
Well, yeah. So 5, 6, 7 years ago, I was, I'm a pastor of a Catholic church. Was a pastor. Now I work in administration for the chancery. But I was just really interested in church growth and church renewal, and just realizing that the church had so much more potential than maybe what we were experiencing. It is the gospel. It's transformed Western culture in the last 2,000 years, and I didn't see it transform my neighborhood. And so it just seemed like there was something missing. And I know we've got all the spiritual graces that we need, but it didn't seem like it was really being used in the right way. And so I just really started digging into my learner and input before I knew that I had learner and input. It was, just started reading a book. Well, the first book I really read was not the first book ever, but on church renewal and growth would be by another Catholic priest, Father James Mallon, who I think was a guest on this podcast. Yeah, he wrote a book called Divine Renovation, which is really about moving your parish from maintenance, just kind of keeping it going, to mission, to being on mission. That really excited me. And in the book, he talks about Gallup, of course, but he also talks about another book that Gallup has written, which is Growing an Engaged Church by Al Winsman there. And I read it and loved it, and I'm like, oh, here's the answer right here. Here it is. And I shared it with the people that I work with on a regular basis. I love the whole aspect of a good soil church. Like it's one thing to, you sprinkle all these, discipleship things and all this catechesis, or, the teaching of the church and the gospel. You can sprinkle all that stuff on, but it has to be on good soil. And if people aren't ready to receive it, it'll never grow. And so I just love that whole concept of like, oh yeah, I'm going to have to be able to help my church to be a good soil church. I also love the concept in that book about belong, believe, and behave. And I come from a tradition, a Catholic church tradition. It's I would say it's a caricature of the Catholic Church, not the reality of the Catholic Church. Is that we emphasize behaviors a lot, right? So if you think, oh, what does the church teach? Like, well, it's anti this, know this, know that, and that's not really what the church is. We're Christians, and we believe that Jesus is the Savior of the world and the Redeemer of humanity, and he loves us. He loves us so much that he sent his only Son. So yeah, I believe that, and oftentimes, just getting from belong, believe, behave, we have probably emphasized the behave part more than the belonging part, and then walking with people, which is really what evangelization is, or evangelism is it's helping people to have that sense of belonging, that they're loved, they're cared for more than they can imagine. And then slowly, if they're ready, they can believe certain things that Jesus teaches. And then if they really want to go crazy, they can behave in the way that Jesus is maybe inviting them to behave. But I just ask the question to myself always, is like, I don't behave 100% perfectly on every day basis. Hopefully that's not a scandal to people, that a priest is saying like, I'm not perfect. But at this point, I think everybody should know that we're not all that perfect. So I just asked the question, like, why do we emphasize behavior so much when really I'm not doing it perfectly? And I actually behave better when I feel like I belong better, and that helps me to believe better, and then I can behave. So so that was huge for me, just reading Al's book. Then I attended Father Mallon's conference in Halifax. He had a Divine Renovation conference, and that was instrumental in for me to really learning even more about Gallup, because I came back with this one central idea, like, of all the things I needed to do in my church, is I need to have a leadership team. I need to have people around me where I share my leadership, and they help me accomplish the vision. They're as much responsible for winning as I am. And I think there's been a mentality, especially I can't speak for other churches, but I can only speak for my experience here in Midwest Catholic church land. There's a lot of us that are lone rangers. We feel like, because we're the pastor and we kind of have a hierarchy, that everything, it really does come to our desk, and it's the buck stops there. And it often it's sort of been kind of the pastor prince sort of mentality, like, I'm the prince of my little kingdom here, and and I delegate tasks to everybody, and this new concept of like sharing my leadership and sharing responsibility with other people was huge. So I came back and I formally established a leadership team, and then really strengths became the means, or the tool to develop more cohesion on that team. Like, it's not just, hey, let's get together, but I like for that team to be cohesive, to have that sense of of knowing that we're many parts in one body, right? That's kind of a Christian thing. But right here in this small group, strengths really helped pull that together. But I'll have to be honest, like, we took the assessment, we went through them, and like, oh, that's kind of interesting. But we also kind of thought, I guess it led us to question, like, well, why do you do this, and why are you so good at that?
Yeah.
But I also say, like, it kind of sat on the shelf as well.
Yeah. Hey, Jeff.
Yeah.
Let's break this out into some chapters, because first and foremost, what I hope the audience, Jim, Lindsay, Spain, I know you're out there listening as our lead partner in this relationship. I hope you all. I don't know if jealousy is a good outcome, but do you see why I enjoy and call Father Jeff my friend? Who doesn't want to hang around with this testimony and who he is? Again, I know he's going to be embarrassed by what I'm saying, but do you hear his strengths come out in the story he's telling? I mean, there's just a shockwave of connectedness throughout all of this. You hear his input, right? He's consuming information, but he's converting it to application. So I love the portal that you represent, and even it's like I was saying, I was coming out of my skin. Jeff, I'm glad you were sitting down, and maybe you're buckled in, because I think at some point in time you might be standing up and moving around your. But this is the sincerity, and this is when it's right, when we see that type of alignment and authentic gesture and demonstration of oneself. So it's great to see how on this is for you. And this is why we want you telling the story, because one of the things we saw this with Lindsay, if some of you saw Lindsay with Greg Kirsch and others, the detonator to this is somebody who actually believes in it and wears it enough to extend it on through naturally to who they are. Every single one of these profound organizational transformations has started with somebody. Right. And so, Jeff, I'm really thrilled that we get to hear from you as that somebody, and you're telling this story so well. The other thing that I want us all to be listening into is just how these seemingly small, innocent accumulations of experiences roll up and become very powerful, impactful, transformational experiences. So Father Jeff, because of his strengths, starts off, he reads a book. It sparks a thought. It creates a conversation. He attends a conference, etc. And then all of a sudden, it's broadened out into this framework of belong, believe, and behave. And so now, how does that start to tell a story then in a way that it operationalizes itself? Jeff, if you could, I'd like to have you take us back into a little bit more about this notion of getting. I always say getting the cart and the horse in the right order. And you did a great job of really designating those 3 touch points. But I want to make sure we go back and really establish those and not move through those too quickly, because I think there's something about discipleship in that message about belonging. And if we get that set, almost everything is possible on the other side, right? Everything else is almost symptomatic and I'll overcorrect in my statement. It's a side effect, so to speak. But I think we have a chance inside this conversation, and you're doing this, of discipleship inside belonging in a way that we could establish it maybe, dare I say, even more effectively or with more intentionality than we were before. Do you have an opinion or a thought as we really establish that footing?
Yeah, absolutely. There's a process of evangelization. We would talk. So basically, what is evangelization? It's the process by which disciples are made, and there's different thresholds of evangelization. So I grew up in the Catholic world. Basically, people just kind of telling me what we teach, and basically, what do I need to believe? And then how do I need to behave? But I really struggle to understand, like, but do I really belong? And of course, that comes through a process of growing and relationship with other people. Because you belong to not just organizations, but to people who belong to organizations. So where I feel like the belong part fits in is those first thresholds of evangelization. And the first thresholds are like that sense of, do they trust us? Do other people even like us? Like, are we likable? Do they have a sense that we care for them? Are we clear about what our expectations are? So you start to see, like, some of the early stages of discipleship. It doesn't look like a sainthood at all. It's just like, can I help a person feel like they're loved and wanted and cared for without throwing Jesus down their throat? And because, well, it's just a part of the church that we I don't think we've understood really well, and I think we're beginning to rediscover in this time what we would call in the Catholic Church kind of a new evangelization. Like, what is this new evangelization? Do we have to speak louder about how people need to behave? That's the new evangelist? I don't think so. Do I need to like just be louder about the things that we believe? No, I think we need to be better stewards of helping people know that they're loved and they're wanted, and God died for them, and can't help but love them so much that he sent his only son.
Yeah. So, Jeff, I have input as well. I think sometimes input operates in terms of like bumper stickers or taglines. You just said something that's in my mind just illuminated, highlighted, underscored, italicized. Better stewards, and I want to, you can craft it. Better stewards of how we love, or better stewards of love. If I walk away with one thing from this conversation, that's going to be a primary takeaway. That was profound. Better stewards of love. I think there's an accountability there. One of the things that as we operationalize that, then Jeff, is, and you touched on this, I want to go back and get us established there. So entry points. Then, right? So you're caught up in this. You've read some things. You've attended some things. You believe in it. You talked about the entry point of a leadership council. Where did that work? Why was that part of your intentional strategy? And what would you want this audience to know about the assembly of that leadership council based on the application of strengths and/or engagement in the Omaha Archdiocese?
Yeah, so here locally in the Archdiocese of Omaha, we're basically, the way it works is the Archdiocese is a geographical area. It's northeast Nebraska. It's 23 counties. It's about 130 parishes and 70 Catholic schools, and about 240,000 Catholics. So 250,000 people here in northeast Nebraska that are Catholic. And so we have a vision here that the church, about 5 years ago, kind of really, I would say, inspired by Divine Renovation, Father Malin's book, and really he's just tapping into all these other great leadership books. And he just asked the question, what's the vision? And so we asked the same question here in Archdiocese. Like, in our wildest dreams, what could we hope for the church here? And then we concluded with, we dream of a place that could be one, that could be unified. We'd be one church that's encountering Jesus constantly, that we're equipping disciples to go to the work of ministry, and that we're living mercy, like we're living, breathing embodiment of mercy here on earth, just like Jesus Christ was. That's the dream. Like, that's the vision. How could you not get excited about that? It's so, but having a dream is one thing. It's sort of a kind of an ideation sort of thing. Ideas are easy. Execution is really hard, and that's where it comes to life. But I would say this vision has really been inspiring us to move forward. As it should. So a lot of people have been through mission and envisioning, planning and stuff like that, and then they put it on the shelf and like, or they make the T-shirt or the poster, and nothing ever happens. This I feel like, because of our leadership of our bishop, he has not just worn the T-shirt, but he has not tired of talking about the dream that he has, and he really thinks it's not his dream. It's the dream of the church, which was welling up through the Holy Spirit in the hearts of people. So the unity part has a lot to do with the belonging. So we dream of a church that's unified in one. Well, how do you do that? You help people feel like they belong to the mission. And then the equipping part, equipping disciples, has a lot to do with leadership. So the unity part was really like, do our people feel like they belong to the mission? Are they engaged in it? Every pastor will tell you that there's a small group of people in every church that's really engaged. And I think you just asked the question, like, what if you doubled that? What if you had 30 people? And I think it's, 30% worldwide is what you guys come up with. Yeah, that's 70% of your people that are not engaged. And that when we're called to be good stewards of the people that God has entrusted us to. And so we just asked, what, if you could double the number of your engaged people, if you went from, and I'm not saying that double the percentage, but always just double the number of people. So if you had 30, let's go to 60. I mean, even the churches with 30 people that are really engaged, that they are all in, they are psychologically loyal, and they just love it. Like, it's family to them. And they do amazing work. And I might have sort of some, what we call like holy discontent about the state of the church today. But uh, but I also believe that there's amazing things happening too, despite ourselves. like,
Yeah, right.
like we've gotten in the way a lot, and yet amazing things happen. So what if you just doubled the number of engaged people
Yeah.
from 30 to 60? So it's that sense of you're not going to get everybody to be at Mother Teresa's overnight or even over a week. And so there's a process. What's the process? Well, I gotta help people feel like they belong, and if they have a sense that that we're on this mission together, they begin to be engaged. And then I sprinkle in a little bit of let's go here, let's go there, let's do this. Then I think you begin to see a lot of fruit. So I think we're mistaken when we think, whether it's a church organization or a corporate organization, you have to have good soil. You have to have a good culture before you can do amazing things. And I think read every leadership book in the world, and they'll tell you that
Yeah.
over and over again.
Yeah, no, I love that, Jeff. You have great partners. You were the catalyst for this. I'm going to call out Jim Jensen. I'm going to call out Jen Moser. Certainly, Archbishop Lucas. As you were able to, I think, help him understand what it is that you were introducing and the consideration there. His leadership, I think, should be acknowledged in what you've been able to do within the Omaha Archdiocese. I'm really curious if we could help us identify how, from his leadership vantage point, what was it that he connected with in partnership with you that he saw? What were the features of strengths and/or engagement that he saw having such impact in the way that there was an endorsement and a support around what that meant to the Archdiocese overall?
Yeah. Well, before I talk about the Archbishop, I'll also mention Jim and Jen,
Okay,
Jim
sure.
Jensen and Jen Moser, because so I can sit here and I have these great ideas, right? But oftentimes, because of my melancholic disposition, I kind of come back and say, "Oh, this is never going to work." But these two, they really, I didn't convince them. They convinced themselves. They believe in this as well. And they've seen the fruit of it in other work that they've done. And so to have that, they're a part of my leadership team. And so I share leadership with them, and so winning is our responsibility, not my responsibility. So they've been integral in helping us be successful. And I know I always think that you think we're more successful than I think we're successful, but you have a different vantage point than I have. I'm like in the thick of it, and I think we are so far from the top of Mount Everest, but they're really important. Like it would have never moved forward without those two. So I would say like that. Like if there's Catholics listening here, like, well, I want to do what Father Loig's doing. And I got to convince my bishop. I'm like, well, good luck. Like, I wouldn't start there. Like,
Yeah,
I would
great advice.
start with a couple people that have influence, but primarily that they believe in it, and I would say everybody has influence. So find those people in your life. They're already there. You have influence with them, and they have influence with others. But those people who believe in it with you, and let it grow from there, and don't give up on it. But as far as our bishop goes, so it's good to know what his top 5 are, and I'll just get his top 3 are context, belief, and connectedness. So he's one of the few people that have connect. I think he's the only one here in the chancery that has context as his number 1. And so he constantly begins with, he always tells you the story of how we got there and how we got where we are today. But because of his belief, he believes in the vision. I am utterly amazed. So this is where he doesn't talk about his belief, when we do like sharing your strengths kind of exercises and meetings and whatnot, but he rarely will I ever talk about belief. I don't think he fully understands it. He really understands his context, but the belief part, that's probably what I see coming out more and more. He loves Jesus. He loves the church, and he believes in the vision that the Lord has given us. And so because of that, he fits it into the context of our past, of where we've been, and how the vision is so needed for our present time. And then you go from there, so he connects all that together, and that he sees that the God has provided, right? There's a reason for everything. And because of this, he'll buy in any tool that's going to help the vision move forward. Now, he's not going to be the front person. You'll never see him at a bishop's conference like pushing the strengths and engagement, but he'll say something like, the vision is so important, whatever it takes to get there, let's do it. And so the endorsement isn't always front and center, but it's there. His job is to be the cheerleader of the vision, but then he allows us to use the tools that we can find to help move it forward. And these are the tools that Jim, Jen, and other teammates, our superintendent of Catholic schools and family life director and our stewardship director, Shannon Brommer, they are also beginning to see the fruits in their own teams. So they're doing it in their own teams. They're like, oh my gosh, what if parishes started doing this? So my strategic, while I would love to get to Z really quick, I know there's a lot of B, C, D, F, G, all these little steps. And so the steps that which is, I think, really a grace that I've received by talking to you today, Mike, is it helps me to see that we are making progress that I don't think, I could get discouraged because we're not at Z yet. But if I step back and say, you know what, we're at like D, and I don't think we'll never get to Z unless we get to D, and we're at D. We're somewhere around there. But what is D? D means I have a little circle of people and we believe in the vision as well, and we're seeing the fruits of it in our own teams, and whether it's engagement or strengths, both of those things we use a lot here in my team and the offices that I'm responsible for, and I think you're just going to see it being pushed out a little bit more because it's becoming such a fabric of our daily life here that it's not even like it's become part of the lexicon.
Yeah. Jeff, let me. So a couple. I always like to take notes, right? Mentally, what are the key touch points that I think we all ought to be listening into? So a couple things I would call out specifically is, and we're seeing this in the chat, but those points of entry can be really intuitive and agile. But what we know is who's naturally contagious, who's naturally bought into. We don't have to win everybody over all in one fell swoop. Right. And I think it's fine and healthy that there's a range of processing to this. I don't think we should, there's a fine line between being fearless and reckless, in our attempts. And so I love the fact that we have some people in our constituency who ask more questions, and there's different processes of not just resistance, but just consideration, right? As we operationalize, there's a mindfulness about that. There are others, though, who provide that catalytic kind of contribution to what all this represents. And so I love the fact that we can enter into those who have, with authentic credibility, a catalytic contribution, like I mentioned, and then we start to, with performance and evidence, start to show up and involve ourselves in other areas, and to be able to win other people over by the fruit of what's been accomplished prior. So I love the fact that you as you speak so well about, Jim with this notion of stewardship, Jen with the notion of mentoring, as it rolls up and gives you even speaking points to Archbishop Lucas, that there's promises that have already been made and kept, right? And there's an evidence outcomes orientation to that. And that's consistent with strengths and engagement. We get pretty graphic and overcorrected sometimes, but we know the trapdoor we can fall into is, and you mentioned this early in your testimony, the trick is, hey, we took StrengthsFinder. That was fun for about a day. And I was wildly interesting, and then it goes in the top left-hand drawer of my desk, and we never talk about it or do anything with it again. Hey, these 12 items of engagement, aren't they interesting and novel and unique? And let's measure and use them one time. And now engagement is stale. We did it once, and I wonder what we're going to do next. And what you did, though, right? And I love the story that you told about Archbishop Lucas, is these are tools, these are leading indicators, and they should always serve the purposes of our outcomes, serve the purposes of our priorities. And I love the way, with his leadership perspective, he very clearly, and in what we would say in a non-thematic reference point, talks about the outcomes. And then we can use all sorts of things with meaningfulness and relevance. And so I would say we have the cart and the horse in the right order. Otherwise, these are a trick. They're a deception and they're a trap, and that's absolutely not the way they should work. So I love the fact that your story has all of those things so sequentially in order, the right things for the right reasons, serving as leading indicators. Otherwise, I think there can be a disconnect, and I think we should be cautious about, hey, this is a waste of time and resources, and we don't have the capacity. Our mission is too important for us to wander, I think, and guess about too many of these things too often. So, Jeff, I want us to get in more specifically on the other side of the architecture that you're building, right? So you come in through this leadership council, you assemble that, and we would say in our chapters, right, we're thinking about introduction, right? How did you introduce the concepts of strengths and engagement in? And I think that's a really natural entry point that we have to somehow extend this on through leaders who buy in, believe, and can start to extend and create outcomes on the other side. Where did you start on the other side of introduction? Tell us a little bit about implementation, either formal structural implementation, or to your point, as you talk about it, changing the fabric of the archdiocese, maybe of the curia. Where did you see evidence that it was starting to infiltrate and to become comfortable in how people were speaking to it and using it?
Yeah, so we knew that so the way the church works is that we're all independent. Each church, each parish is independent. And while the Archbishop has ultimate authority, he doesn't use it that way. He doesn't lord it over people. So the way, our primary way of change is through influence. And so we knew if we're going to influence the rest of the diocese, we knew we were going to have to eat our own pudding or whatever, right? We're gonna have to eat what we're making here, and so we decided to go all in. I mean, praise God. Again, the Archbishop, he didn't study it like I studied it. Like that's because those are my strengths. But he said, okay, let's do it. So here in the Chancery, we have about between 70 employees basically working in this one building. And we said, well, let's go all in. Let's do strengths, and let's do the Q12 engagement survey. The surveys are one thing, but that's not what it's about. The Q12 is, it's a framework for engagement. It's a way in which we manage people and be good stewards of the people that the Lord has entrusted us to. So what we did was we just I think right now we're pretty close. Everybody's gone through, received strengths, of course, their assessment, but we also have several strengths coaches here in the Chancery. And so internally, we've been using those people who have been who've been trained to be strengths coaches to train other folks here. But then we, of course, are starting to do the engagement part, the Q12, and so what happened was, so we've been doing it, I think we've been in it for 2 years now. So we've, our second time around, after our second year, we took it. And so I'm like, I'm going to do it right this time. So I'm like training the managers here. So I don't have an MBA, but I have learner and input. So that qualifies me for pretty much anything. If I'm really passionate about it, if I believe in it, I might as well have an MBA and a tiny little niche thing of business. But so we started doing manager roundtables, manager training, and but then once we took our Q12, we looked at our results. We said, what's great, what's not working, where could we see it that's improving. But even before that, so if you follow the instructions that you guys give for the state of the team, so it's when you sit down with your team, you look at all your results, and you say, what are we going to do about it, right? So measuring only matters if you're going to do something. Otherwise, you're just measuring for the sake of measuring. So we want to do something with it. But when we sat down, the first question is, what's your goal here in the Chancery? So it's 70 employees. We're like the headquarters of a franchise. And we have never asked the question, what's our goal? What are we trying to accomplish? So when we ask the question about engagement, so what do we want to work on engagement for? We just ask, engaged in what? Like, what are we trying? So we don't make widgets. We're not a for-profit. We're not trying to increase profit and revenue. What do we do? And so so I'll say the evidence, while it's not data, it's data. Right? Anecdotes are data, qualitative data, is that for the first time ever, we started asking the question, what do we want to accomplish for the Lord? Or what does the Lord want to accomplish through us? So we actually, because of this question, we asked, what are we engaged in? And it was like, it was just birds, like, just crickets, like just nothing. I don't know. What are we supposed to be doing? Like, we kind of do what we're supposed to do, but are we accomplishing? So it was really hard to track and be accountable for results. So what we actually just went through is we're in the process of actually really close to completing it, is a 10-year goal for the Archdiocese of Beaumont. It's one thing to have a vision, but then the vision has to have sort of like, well, what's your plan for accomplishing it? What are the milestones and markers? And so this is the fruit of what happened when we took the Q12, is that we asked the question, what do we want to accomplish? And now we have a 10-year goal. And I'm not going to reveal it because it's not time to reveal it. But but this 10-year goal has the potential to impact the next generation of the Catholic Church in Northeast Nebraska. Because we can honestly say here in this chancery, we are going to be responsible for making our church different in 10 years or less. And so what are we engaged in? Making missional churches, right? Churches that are on mission to transform the world for the kingdom, to expand his kingdom. And we've never had that before. And now we actually have a tool that helped us ask the question, but now we have a tool to say, like, are we in it or not? Like, it's one thing to have a mission, right? But am I engaged in it? And am I a good manager to be able to help my employees just not come to work, but come on mission, right?
Yeah. Yeah. Jeff, when you talk about this, and I love this frame of reference, we get a little bit, we reference positive psychology in the midst of all this, and I'll let that, you're much more adept in terms of how that actually contributes, or if it actually does, when we think about theology and our own faith. But the point there, I think that you describe, it's really interesting, the state of the team, and as you describe how you have a 10-year vision around it. I love this reference point when we talk about hope. Right. And when we break hope down, there's two parts to it. There's what we would say sometimes is the willpower, and then there's the way power. And I love how beautifully you just, and so succinctly, quite frankly, sometimes we can look at the state of the team and we think that it's almost like an operator manual to how I program my Blu-ray, or it's like how do I put together my lawnmower? And it's so much more than that. And you just nailed the center of it. It's helping us first and identify our willpower. Why do we even want to do this? And how do we get our arms around it? But not just that we have this engine of desire and motivation to go somewhere and to do something. We actually have what we would say is a way power. We actually have a strategy and an intelligence about how we can get there, right? So now this 10-year plan isn't some daunting, intimidating thing that we don't know if we could ever be big enough to ever arrive at. We know we can, because we can cast the vision and then reverse engineer it through our intentional involvement and the structure of just a simple, straightforward conversation that causes us to commit ourselves collectively and individually to something that now can become a reality. And again, the way you unfold the story is terrific inside all of that. And even just the fact now that we have a 10-year plan, right? That there was a call to action inside that conversation for us to create something that didn't exist. So again, a lot of power and influence, I think, in terms of what you're sharing with us. Jeff, one of the things, so we're talking about a lot of things that have gone right, right? A lot of things that did work out. And I think there's a reality though to it that's really useful to our audience in terms of perseverance, resiliency, where there was a slower reception to maybe strengths or engagement. Where did that show up? We'll qualify it as part of the process, right? That some people ask different questions and maybe need more evidence to substantiate their buy-in and belief. Where did that show up, and what did you think was effective about the angle and positioning of strengths and engagement to where people considered it where they hadn't initially, and some of the push through that you saw happen there?
Yeah, so I would say usually the initial response is skepticism. What is this corporate business tool? Why is this? What does this have to do with the church? And so there's lots of counter arguments to that. Well, yeah, we use tools all the time. I'm using a computer. I'm using a Logitech camera right now. Right. So it's helping me to get the job done that I need to get done. And the church never had any of this. In the early church, and I said, the church wouldn't be anything. The early church, Christianity wouldn't be anything unless the Romans built the roads. So those are really useful tools that we use a lot. So there's a lot of skepticism about that, and I think it's important to understand that the church it's not an entrepreneurial organization, right? We were not built out of a garage in the 90s during the tech boom. Like, we're not Google. Like, so we're not always looking for like new and good, and like that is not how we operate. And I think it's important for, if you're working in the church, if you have a 2,000-year tradition that you have to sort of be aware of, you're going to have to make a case for how does this new thing, and I wouldn't even say it's new, it's very human. The stuff that Don Clifton and Gallup they were able to articulate is really just human stuff. That you were able to research human behavior and say, and then put it and quantify it and blah, 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 all that, do all the sciencey stuff. Right. Yeah. So my job has been to be able to kind of make the case that, to be strengths-based is to be faith-based. Like, there's no contradiction in that at all. And so I had a chance to speak with our priest council. It's about 15 priests throughout the diocese that were chosen by their peers to be leaders in the diocese, to really be a council and advisory board for the archbishop. So they gave me the opportunity to do some strengths with them, and they liked it enough that they wanted to do it for the whole diocese, for all of our priests. Which is about what is it? I think it's like 130 guys or something like that. I lose track here and there, and then you helped out with that, and you did a great job. But I don't know if it won everybody over. I know I walked away really kind of struggling, like, oh gosh, I was like, maybe that was too fast for these guys, but we are seeing fruit of it. So, but I would say one of the things I've had to do is just make a case. So I created a top 8. I probably have a top 10. I could probably squeeze some out, but I think you can use some of the sources of Christianity, and especially the Catholic Church, to make a case for how the strengths philosophy fits into this. So particularly in the strengths area, engagement is maybe a different. I haven't made my top 10 list for that yet, but there's a thing in the Catholic Church where we talk about human formation is foundational. Before you can get into the spiritual formation, you have to know who you are as a human being. So when we train our priests, they go through seminary, usually between 6 and 8 years. A big pillar, one of the 4 pillars of their formation, is human formation. And I think strengths is a great means to grow as a human being, understand who you are, what makes you tick, why you're wired, why you do this way. And I actually just did a strength seminar workshop for the seminarians over Christmas break. And so one guy came back and he just said, oh my gosh, now I understand why I'm so different than my other RAs. So he's, all the other resident advisors, like, because there's other guys in his group that are slackers in his viewpoint. Because you know what? He had his top 5 are all executing. They were all the purple ones, and they're like, yeah, no wonder you get crap done, right? But everybody else is sort of like massaging relationships, and he's just getting crap done. So it was huge for his human formation and his ability to get along with other people. Like, oh, like I'm wired differently than everybody else, and I need to respect the gifts and talents that the other people have that I work with. So that's human formation. Self-knowledge, we would say, is a gateway to all discernment. So discernment is a very, I wouldn't say it's, I do attend some evangelical churches every once in a while, but so I don't know the lexicon there. But in the Catholic Church, spiritual discernment, especially in the tradition of Saint Ignatius, the Jesuit sort of spirituality, this spiritual discernment is a big part of prayer and understanding how God is speaking to you. And I think oftentimes we confuse God's voice with just kind of our human voice. So like, we're just not living out of our strength. So it feels wrong. If like, maybe the Lord doesn't want me to do this. Yeah. But actually, if you begin to understand, have some self-knowledge of who you are as a human being, how you're wired, then you can begin to discern, well, that's just my strengths. That's just my kind of on the emotional level of my heart. Yeah. But then there's this other level, like the deeper level, the spiritual level of how God is speaking. I also think, like strengths is not just a personality assessment. It's about growth. Mm-hmm. And that's I think what makes strengths so different from all the other assessments out there, because it's understanding that you can actually grow in this. And that's that's the desire that we have, that the Lord has for us, that we would become the people He's calling us to be, that we grow in that. I think learning, loving, and living our strengths honors God. St. Francis de Sales has this great quote. It's be who you are and be that well. Be
Huh.
who you are and be that well. Don't try to be anybody else. Just be
Yeah.
who you are and be that well. So it's about really just honoring God by being the person He's calling us to be. It's good for
Yeah.
humility. Humility is not just accepting our weaknesses. Humility is a recognition of that which is true. And so if I can really hold on to I understand my top 5 or my dominant strengths, my dominant themes. I understand which is true about myself, what I'm good at. Again, humility is not just like, oh, I'm no good at this, and I should just kind
Mhm.
of cower. Like, no, it's living in truth. So I think
Mhm.
strengths help us to live in humility.
Yeah. Hey, Jeff.
Yeah.
The chat is absolutely losing its mind right now in all sorts of great ways. You're provoking a lot of thought. I want to come back and just give you a little bit of a breather here and just help you kind of absorb what it is you're causing people to think about differently as it reinforces what you're sharing with us. First off, you missed out on the copyright, because we're going to market this like crazy. And Bree is right out of the gate. I caught it too, but I want to make sure that that you really appreciate what you just said. To be strengths-based is to be faith-based. And I love the way you paired those two together, where they don't compete, they don't collide, but we can have a complement of what that exactly means. So again, as we think about those sound bites, unbelievable teaching inside of that I think for all of us to take away. A lot of reaction to the reference of human formation, right? And there's I think an open hand, non-prescriptive attitude and air that we allow the person to kind of grow and breathe on their own, right? And to uniquely be who they are. And I personally one of the things that I've always appreciated about our relationship, and you've helped me understand, that if God created us with this intentionality and this design, right? We all know how rare and unique we are. We all have fun with the math around, what's the likelihood that you and I will share the same top 5 in the same order. And that's fun and recreational when we think about 33 million. But what you've really helped me understand, and I think as we think about the invitation, specifically about the belonging piece, is that if God created us with that intentionality and that design, which goes far beyond even strengths, right? Don't you think that there's probably an intentionality, and that's where and how He designed us to experience Him? Right? So that Jeff, when you think about your top 5 strengths, your strategic, your learner, your input, your futuristic, how does God reveal Himself to you so that you have that personalized encounter with Him through the activity of those strengths? How does He reveal Himself to me through that personalized encounter and activity that I have through my own? And it's so unique and so specific. And that's where the relational connection comes through in such a profound way. And again, strengths doesn't even qualify almost as even a part of that. And yet it starts to give us an insight, I think, to terms of how we encounter Him, and then also then how we can extend that to encounter and invite others. The other thing that I thought you brought out too, that I really want the audience to lean into, is this equipping and this shift as we think about priests as leaders, and bringing some of that business acumen in about how we build teams, how we arrive at outcomes. And I don't know if that always happens. I think you were very transparent about that there's more that can be added to it. I think a lot of times I think of you almost like the chief operating officer to a large degree for the Omaha Archdiocese. I don't know if you would adopt that role, but when you think about outcomes and then establishing a culture that drives those outcomes, there is an intentionality around that. And I think that's been a big part of our contribution as we move into that. So Jeff, I'd like to have us, as we think about evidence, as you pull back the lens for all of us, we bring our conversation to a conclusion. I think what we would all love to hear, and this is qualitative, quantitative, where has your introduction, your implementation, where has it actually landed with impact? Where can you step back and say, we're doing things differently and better than we were before, and help us understand and get excited about that?
Yeah, it's again, I've given a few of those examples, and I think there's a lot more honesty happening. I think that's what the engagement conversations allow us to do. When we first took the Q12 here in the Chancery, we had a pretty high score, and then actually it's growing, which is great. So there's some, if you need some data, I'm not a huge data person, but but what I was actually impressed with was some of the teams and offices that had high scores the first time around actually had lower scores the second time around.
Mm.
And it's not like we changed personnel. It's not like they changed their objectives or anything like that. What I think what happened was because there was permission to talk about how they were doing and just using those 12 questions of engagement, I think it gave permission for people to be a lot more honest. And I think we in the church and in church world, we have a penchant for sometimes being too nice to each other, and then kind of taking on a sort of a passive aggressive attitude. And like, kind of let somebody talk in a meeting and like, okay, that's really, and then we don't feel that permission to be honest with them, because we don't know where they're coming from. We're just like, they just think we think they're crazy. So then after the meeting, we talk about them, and but we just have this penchant for like just trying to not hurt anybody's feelings. And I think what the engagement conversations allows us to do is be a little bit more honest and not be afraid to get some feedback as a manager or a boss or a pastor, to understand that we all want to accomplish the same thing, and then be able to like give the feedback that's necessary for people to be more engaged. And so we just know that the more people get to chime in, the more they're going to end up buying in to all the things that we're trying to do. So the engagement allows for those conversations to happen. So I could give you stories, but I could also show you like some of our best teams. Like I think our stewardship office is one of our most engaged teams here in the Archdiocese. Their score went down because I think they got more honest.
Yeah.
And because who cares about the score? What's happening is they're being more honest, and they're going to get more crap done.
So a couple things, and then Jim, I want you to jump in here. So for the record, Father Jeff said crap twice now. So we actually got him to kind of flirt with a little bit of almost getting so enthusiastic that he uttered what was dangerously close to an obscenity. So that's a cue that we want to listen into. But Jim, I know you've had a chance to process through the chat and what people are thinking about. What's on your mind right now as we converge to a conclusion here?
Yeah, Father Jeff, I think you're right on actually on the scores going down. Like I think that's a great index. Sometimes, there's some safety in that too, right? They know like I can now be honest and transparent, and I'm not going to be punished. And so that's a great indicator, I think, that you've gathered trust in that area, and maybe a continued strengths emphasis builds that trust, right? Maybe that working in that space, knowing who I am. By the way, that human formation term, I am totally going to steal. Like that is that's gold right there. But Richard asked this question out there. He says, is there a concept with the strengths-based approach that has provided you with a fresh perspective for your faith and relationship with God? So as you think about that, your top 5 and how that relates to that, how would you answer that?
Yeah. So the story I didn't tell at the beginning, but I shared with in our prep meeting was when I got into my new job here. So I was a pastor for 5 years. I think somewhat successful pastor. Loved it. Loved my people. Was in a tiny parish in rural Nebraska, and it was hard to leave for sure. So then I came here. I think I'm going to do these great things in the chancery, and I'm going to work with the Archbishop, and I hated it. And it's still rubs me the wrong way in a little bit, but I didn't know how I fit in. We were creating a new position. There was no job description, and I started to really think, well, maybe I wasn't supposed to come here. So I started doing spiritual discernment, and like, well, maybe the Lord isn't calling me to this. I made a mistake. The Archbishop made a mistake. I should just get out of this as quickly as possible. And then when I went to Gallup for a meeting about the Growing Engaged Church survey, the ME25 that they use, I think it was Lindsay, or I think it might have been Elena. I don't know. It was one of the blonde girls at Gallup. We were just doing introductions, and we did top 5s. And she just said to me, "Oh, you get paid to think." And I thought, "Oh." And then I started connecting it to all the successes I've had in the past. Like, yeah, because I read, and I dream, and then I implement. Right, I input and I output, and then I invite other people to help me, and then next thing you know, we've created something amazing. I was thinking it was a spiritual problem, and what's what that little comment did was made me realize that it was a human problem. Like I was not living out of my strengths or embracing my strengths. Now I spend hours reading every day and thinking, and I give myself permission to just stare at the wall for a little bit and go for walks. I think it's hard to track my hours that I work, because I work when I'm in the shower. I work when I'm, walking around. So I would say that's the fresh insight, is it's helped me discern the spirits. Sometimes it's the spirit of that my human nature it's rubbing the wrong way with the way the God has intended me to live it out. So that's been huge for me. So when I'm a spiritual director as well, so people come and they ask me to help them, guide them. I don't tell them what God is saying to them. I just help them to listen. And one of the things I'm listening to is this really the Lord, or is this just because they're trying to be someone who they're not supposed to be, that God has never intended? So are they living out of their strengths?
One more quick question as we wrap this. Bree asked, how are you integrating strengths into your stewardship and development office?
Well, that is a great question, because
maybe a whole podcast, but let's see if we can do it in a minute or two.
Yeah. And so we've so internally, yes, they are all in on the strengths. They're probably one of our biggest champions for internally the strengths and engagement. They do all the exercises. Shannon, our director there, has discipline in her top 5. So she's going to do it right. So she's going to have a rhythm to it. So it's going to be a part of her life. We're beginning to ask the question externally: how do we serve our parishes? And because I think at the very heart of stewardship is, if I put myself in the pastor seat, and I'm supposed to help people to be good stewards of the gifts, I also, the main thing I want to be responsible for, or I should be responsible for, is, how to say it? I'm going around in circles here. The biggest gift that the Lord has entrusted me to as a pastor and as a parish church leader is the people sitting in those pews. And to be a good steward of their gifts means I have to be able to find a way to engage them. And it's not just about keeping them busy and giving them activities. It is engagement we know is so different than busyness. And I think there's an opportunity for our stewardship office to be able to cast that vision for our schools and our parishes and their leaders, to think about that the people in those pews and in those seats that's the most important gift. It's not the money in their wallets. That's a part of who they are. Money's a part of who we are, but it's so I think we have not had much traction in putting or using the ME25, the Membership Engagement Survey, in our parishes. But I think we're going to do everything we can to use the framework as a way in which we teach stewardship in our parishes.
Yeah, I think that. No, I think that's good. As we bump up against the end here, Mike, why don't we do some thanks and wrap this?
Yeah, without a doubt. So, I I led this off. And I led this off with an introduction with Father Jeff, and I was being somewhat selfish about who he is as my friend. And I think based on what the chat's reaction is, I think he's our friend by the conclusion of this. And you could see why, from all of you could see why I love to spend time with Father Jeff. Like, he changes the way you think, he changes the way you feel, he changes the way you behave for all the right reasons. And I think better. And I love it. And you have a fan club, Father Jeff. It got bigger, let's just say that. I don't think it was an either or, it got bigger. But there was so much merit in what you shared. And so I love your authenticity is raw. It's searing. And we heard that. We heard your heart. We heard your leadership. But the conversions of that, as you extend this invitation for some like Jim, Jen, myself, Elena, Lindsay, others to be part of this, is so captivating. And I think that's really the spirit of everything that you've said, even from start to finish, is we can and should extend a bigger, broader invitation for everybody to be part of what we're doing for the right reasons, unique and relative to their design. And it can be a grand picture and vision when we all do this together. And to me, if there was a singular word that comes out of the theme of what you described, is we can and we should be inviting people better than we are right now to be part of something that's bigger and better than they are right now. And so I thought it was spectacular. Thanks so much for your time and who you are as a leader. It's been an absolute pleasure and privilege to spend this quick hour with you. Jim, back to you.
You bet. And Father Jeff, thanks for me as well. It's always great. You maybe the most quoted guest we've had on Called the Coach in a while. When you get a chance, go back when you watch this again, go back to the chat room. It's pretty great. So thanks for coming on. With that, we want to remind everyone to take full advantages of all the resources we do have available now on Gallup Access, and you can access that easily through our site at gallup.com/CliftonStrengths. Actually take you right to your Clifton Strengths report available for you. Don't forget, you can catch us on YouTube as well. And if you just head out to youtube.com and search Clifton Strengths, you'll see everything that we do there. You can follow us as a podcast on any podcast player. You can search Gallup Webcasts and find us. Subscribe to us there. Do what the cool kids are doing and listen to podcasts as you're walking the dog and some of those things around the neighborhood. More dog walking going on these days than I've ever seen. Ever. Don't forget, when you're on our site, subscribe to our Clifton Strengths community newsletter. You can do that there at the bottom of the page. If you have any questions at all, you can send us an email, coaching@gallup.com. Don't forget to follow us on Eventbrite, gallup.eventbrite.com. That will give you some notifications every time we do something new, so you can kind of stay up to date with all the things that are happening. Speaking of staying up to date, the 2020 Gallup at Work Summit has changed 100% virtual, and we love to have you join us there. June 2nd. It's happening. In fact, Abby is coming on a little bit later this afternoon to talk about that here on Called the Coach. But you can get all the details right now, gallupatwork.com. We'd love to see you there. Prices is at a price point that I think will work for a lot of people. So we'd love to see you at our virtual summit June 2nd. Join us in our Facebook group, facebook.com/group/called to coach. And then on LinkedIn, just search Clifton Strengths Trained Coaches, and we'll get you in that group as well. I want to thank you for joining us today. If you're listening live, stay around for a smidgen of a post show. With that, we'll say goodbye, everybody.